All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle McDonald, and I am the director of the Library and Museum here at the American Philosophical Society. As we do with every program, we are going to start with a land acknowledgement. The American Philosophical Society resides in Lenapehoking, the past, present, and ongoing homeland of the Lenape people. And the APS acknowledges with respect their continued presence and perseverance and expresses its sincere thanks for the past and the ongoing generosity of numerous Indigenous communities and individuals who have offered their guidance, expertise, and opportunities for collaboration. Now, before we get to this afternoon's program, I always like to do this. By a show of hands, not the staff in the balcony, by the show of hands, how many of you have been to the APS before? Woo, almost all of you. All right, so then this is going to be more a rehearsal for me and less new knowledge for you. But I wanted to give you a brief introduction to the APS and its activities. So, the American Philosophical Society, founded in 1743 by Benjamin Franklin and others. I always like using this quote because it indicates both, I think, how far-reaching their vision was in creating a learned society where they thought they had the capacity and the knowledge and the expertise to bring together a scientific community on par with the Royal Society of London, and perhaps a smidge of naivete. At the beginning of their founding document, they say the first drudgery of settling the colonies, which confines the attention of people to mere necessities, is now pretty well over in 1743. Yeah, they had a bit of a road still to travel. But their idea was a sound one, and it perseveres. What we do at the APS today is, I think, far broader and multifaceted than it was initially envisioned in 1743. We have an APS elected membership. These are scholars who are acknowledged for their contributions in various fields. 835 exist in our membership today. Over 100 Nobel laureates have been elected over the course of our existence. We also have 162 international members. Because of that membership, we have 2 annual meetings a year, one in the spring and one in the fall, where these members gather to share their thoughts, share their ideas, share their scholarship, very much in the same spirit as Benjamin Franklin and his colleagues envisioned when the APS was first organized. We also, of course, have library and museum conferences, and we have scores of public events like that you are attending today. In fact, if you want to learn more about what's upcoming, you will notice on your table a small red flyer or pamphlet that includes both our evening lectures and our daytime programs, and we hope that you will take advantage of many of them. We have recently invigorated the APS Press, which is the longest running scholarly press in North America. It hosts both book manuscript publications as well as 2 peer-reviewed journals. And we offer over 300 research grants a year. But I want to talk a little bit about the library because that's my domain. So the library has over 14 million pages of manuscripts, over 325,000 bound volumes, over 300,000 digital objects. I mentioned there are 7 Nobel laureates papers listed here as well. I mentioned that over the course of our lifetime, we've had 100, so we have a few more to work on to give us their papers. And then we have over 3,000 museum objects. This is a large institution, and we're glad that you've decided to become a part of it. This work is translated through 4 scholarly centers, one focused on the history of science, one focused on Native American and Indigenous research, one focused on digital scholarship, and one focused on early American history. And how did we do this, you might ask? We do this through the far-sighted financial investment of our founders. We do this with some assistance through federal grants, knock on wood. And we do this because of friends like you. And so the second piece of paper you will find on your table, if you are not already I do encourage you to become a friend of the APS. Entry level is relatively low, and again, it gives you access not only to our public programs, but a whole range of behind-the-scenes activities, collections, tours, salons with the librarian, all sorts of events that occur without the year. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to ask any staff member, but we're glad that you're here, and we're glad that you're participating in the work that we do. So today's talk extends the themes that we explored as part of our just closed 2024 exhibition, Sketching Splendor, American Natural History from 1750 to 1850. And how many of you had a chance to explore that exhibition? Excellent. As a precursor, our next exhibition, Philadelphia, a Revolutionary City, will be opening on April 11th. So mark your calendars now. That exhibition looked at William Bartram, Titian Ramsay Peale, and John James Audubon. As importantly, it explored the untold stories of the men and women, enslaved, free, and indigenous, who contributed to their work. And as visitors engaged with these 18th and 19th century materials, they also tried their hands at sketching themselves. And so as part of today's program, you will see strung along the walls on the sides and in the back some of the sketches that were done by our museum visitors when they came to Sketching Splendor. There is a wide range of talent, a wide range of ages that are represented on these walls, and I encourage you to take a look at the conclusion of today's talk. Overall, this is a small selection. We collected 7,000 sketches from that interactive, and we're hoping at some point to have a digital component to catalog that work. Moreover, if you want to continue engaging with content about this talk, we also encourage you to take a look at Sketching Splendor, which is that exhibition's catalog, and it will be for sale at the end of lunch for $30, I believe. But today, and now, let us focus on Holly Brigham. Holly is a painter based in Philadelphia who creates life-size figures of watercolor that depict historical and mythological women. She has also had solo shows at the Reading Public Museum and the Delaware Art Museum, and will exhibit at Muhlenberg College next year in 2026. Her paintings and her artist books are in the collections of the Smithsonian Institution, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, the Beinecke Museum at Yale University, Smith College Museum of Art, the Georgia Museum of Art, and the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, as well as the Allentown Art Museum and the Mount Holyoke College Art Museum. This is an impressive repertoire, I'm sure you'll agree. Brigham was born in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. She attended Smith College, where she studied art history, and studied abroad in Florence, Italy. She went on to study art history at the graduate level at the University of Pittsburgh, fine arts at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and earned her MFA in painting at George Washington University. She is taught at Pasadena City College, Worcester State College, Worcester Art Museum, and the Baum School of Art. Today, we are lucky to have her discussing two 19th century women naturalist artists as they studied birds and promoted conservation at a time when birds were being depleted by sports hunters and by the demands of fashion. Please join me in welcoming Holly to the podium.
Thank you to Michelle McDonald and Mary Grace Wall for inviting me to give this talk. And thank you to Brenna Holland and Thomas Johns for their assistance in setting up the talk. And thank you all for attending. I am an artist and an art historian, but predominantly an artist. With my goal of with my work, I interpret the lives of historic women artists with the goal of bringing their achievements to a wider audience. My new project is about the 19th century Scottish artist Jemima Blackburn and the American Fidelia Bridges, who had similar artistic, scientific, and social concerns. I'm struck by the connections I feel to Blackburn and Bridges and their interconnectedness to each other, though I have yet to find evidence that they ever met. This project was born from my travels to Scotland and my life in Philadelphia and my love for nature and, most importantly, birds. It addresses my Scottish heritage, but also my German roots. Blackburn and Bridges were moving from a pre-Raphaelite style to their own original styles, which stood out from their contemporary male artists. This project is best told in Philadelphia because of the artists' similar exhibition history here, their Scottish and Philadelphian ornithological overlap, and because I'm a Philadelphian and a PAFA-trained artist. My work for this exhibition will respond to Bridges and Blackburn. The working title for the project is Blackburn, Bridges and Brigham, Song of the Thrush. There will be a total of 6 artist books in the exhibition. Here we see images from my first one that I completed at the end of last summer called In Fidelia Bridges' Footsteps. This one is a page from the second book that I've done, which is an herbarium called Fidelia's Flora. And there will actually be one more for Fidelia Bridges, which will include birds and eggs. And then it will be parallel books for Jemima Blackburn. I'm traveling to Scotland in the spring and will start to do work so that I can commence those artist books. I visited Jemima's stained glass window of the Nativity at the Glasgow Cathedral last fall. And here I'm painting, I'm going to have 2 stained glass windows, and they will be based around the bird, the thrush, which is actually my family name, Trostle, means thrush. I have also copied paintings by the artists, and I've gone to the Academy of Natural Sciences. You can see in the center here one of my watercolors from the thrush specimens, and you see Blackburn's painting on the right. Here are, usually when I do big paintings, I start out with thumbnail sketches. So these are ideas. I'm going to be doing 2 large landscape paintings. This is the beginning stages of the first painting, so it's in my studio in the works right now. It's hard for me to tell you. I would say maybe it's about a third of the way done. The painting is called Fidelia Bridges Painting Thrushes in the Bethlehem Woods. There will be a companion piece of Jemima painting in Moydart in the Western Highlands of Scotland. Each painting will measure 40 by 60 inches, and it's in watercolor. These paintings are meant to correct the general absence of women painters in large landscapes from the 19th century. And I'm especially interested in thrushes and statistics of bird populations from Bridges and Blackburn's time versus present day. Climate change is affecting thrush populations, and as my friends at the Academy of Natural Science tell me, so are feral cats and glass-covered tall buildings, which birds often fly into. Blackburn illustrated 27 books and was very popular in her lifetime. Here are 2 mid-19th century examples of Blackburn's work. She was born in Edinburgh and would eventually settle in the area of Loch Moydart. Her father, who died before she was born, was James Wedderburn, the Solicitor General for Scotland. She was included in the first exhibition of the Society of Female Artists in 1857 and the exhibition of modern British art in America in 1857 to 58. In the middle is the oil painting by Blackburn in the collection of the Hunterian. It demonstrates her close observation of nature, particularly seagulls in flight and their nesting practices. Most of the image is pushed to the forefront in the pre-Raphaelite manner. In 1997, the painting was under a kitchen encasement at the University of Glasgow, and then it moved to picture storage in 2010, and finally beautifully conserved in 2023 for the Dovecot Centre Show in Edinburgh, Scottish women artists, 250 years of challenging perceptions, where I first saw it. The illustrated volume on the right is called Birds Drawn from Nature, which pronounces that her illustrations are developed from close observation, not solely from dead specimens or from copying the work of other artists. This approach was central to her philosophy. Notice how close Blackburn's style resembles the frontispiece in the Naturalists' Library from 1843, published in Edinburgh by Sir William Jardine. Bridges was born in Salem, Massachusetts, and was orphaned at age 15. Her father had been a sea captain. Just as we saw in the previous slide of Blackburn's work, Bridges painted these thrushes in oil from direct observation during hikes in Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. She studied with the American pre-Raphaelite William Trostle Richards at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and this painting is similar to his style. The thrush is a songbird, and hence Blackburn depicts the one on the left with its beak open. Like Blackburn's seagulls, Bridges' thrushes are depicted with their nest and eggs, thereby following the naturalist's interest in the life cycle while also celebrating their beauty. The illustration on the right is a wood engraving published in the popular magazine Scribner's Monthly, which reached an audience of about 200,000. Here we see Jemima Wedderburn's house. Let me see if I can get this right. So this is the house she grew up in Edinburgh. And on the right, we see Bridges' house in Salem, Massachusetts, from the early 19th century. Both artists followed the teaching of John Ruskin. Bridges read Ruskin's Modern Painters and fully embraced truth to nature. Blackburn was a friend and pupil of Ruskin, though he was not always encouraging of her work. Her painting, Plow Horses Startled by a Railroad Engine, was accepted into the Royal Academy in 1849. In a letter from Ruskin to Blackburn, and we assume she asked Ruskin for his opinion, he wrote her a long response. Shockingly, Ruskin said she painted like a monkey and recommended not using bright pigments. The painting has not been located, though there are some drawings. Ruskin, however, did encourage some women artists, such as Kate Greenaway. He was a patron of Lizzie Siddall and offered her an allowance in exchange for her work. So I think, to be fair, Ruskin perhaps encouraged Jemima at points, but continued to be a harsh critic, as we know him to be. Jemima, as a small girl, was sick much of the time, and in 1827, at age 4, was given Thomas Bewick's History of British Birds. She was encouraged to draw all the time. She would later say that she hoped others would find her books as important to them as his was to her. As a child, she dissected dead mice and later took anatomy lessons at the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh. Starting in 1844, the Antique Gallery at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, or CAS collection, was accessible to women for 3 months from 10 to 11 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they could work from 42 casts. From 1856 onward, women were allowed to copy paintings in the galleries, and since 1860, women were offered the chance to participate in anatomy lessons. In 1860, Mary Cassatt and her female friends started meeting for an hour, 4 days a week, to pose for one another. After petitioning, Cassatt and her friends were allowed into model classes and art history classes. It's in 1860, then, that Bridges comes to Philadelphia on the recommendation of Anne Whitney, a friend who was a sculptor, to work at PAFA and draw the cast collection in the antiques class. Emily Sartain was also in that class. In 1859 to 61, there were 100 total students, and 21 were women. Annual exhibitions included Bridges, Lily Martin Spencer, and Rosa Bonheur. Bridges started going to William Trost Richards' lectures and taking private lessons with him and 6 other private students. 2 or 3 of them were women. By 1868, women could draw or paint female nudes, and finally in 1879, women could participate in classes with all models. Bridges also worked as a governess for a family in Germantown to earn money, and here we see a watercolor of a dead bird that she painted while she was working in Germantown. It's in the Florence Griswold Museum. Richards was born in Philadelphia and was just 1 year older than Bridges. He painted in watercolor and oil. And during the summers of 1860 and 1861, Bridges traveled to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, with Richards and his family and other students. Her studio from 1862 to 63 was at 726 Sansom Street, now Jewelers Row. It's not very far away from here. Emily Sartain and her family were her neighbors. Blackburn was good friends with Edwin Landseer, the animal painter who she visited, and she even painted a watercolor of one of their visits. And Landseer in 1843, referring to Blackburn, said that, quote, "In portraying animals, I have nothing to teach her," unquote. In 1854, Bridges and her sister Eliza visited an exhibition of Landseer's work in New York City, so we know she admired his work. Joseph Wolff was a German artist who moved to London in 1848. He helped John Gould illustrate his projects once Elizabeth Gould died. The Pre-Raphaelites loved his work. See how this illustration in his book, Poets of the Woods, has a Pre-Raphaelite style. Like Blackburn, Wolff had pet birds, and it's believed he established wildlife art as a genre. Wolff corresponded with Blackburn, and in a congratulatory note to Blackburn after the publication of her Birds Drawn from Nature, tells her, quote, "In birds, most people look for the colors. Few see the actual form as you do." Bridges' work shares a common aesthetic with Hiroshiga, the Japanese woodblock printmaker. Poetry is a visual part of Hiroshiga's work. So this is actually a poem right here. So it kind of cascades down. And for Bridges, the pairing of birds and poetry is a major theme in her illustrated books, though someone else is writing the poetry. I think of it as a way of representing the bird song. In the late 19th century, there was a trend towards the Japanese aesthetic, and it was pursued by Monet, Van Gogh, and others. Philly's zoo was modeled after London's, and going to the zoo was part of the traditional training at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. Blackburn would regularly visit the London Zoo to paint and draw the birds as well. It was a way of capturing animals in motion. And when I was a student at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, in the first year we went to the Philadelphia Zoo. We had to fill a sketchbook up of drawings from the animals, and it's a very old tradition at the Academy. And if some of you know Henry Ossawa Tanner's work, you can think about his painting of the lion licking its paw. It kind of stems from that tradition. What I wanted to show you here is where the artists were living. They were traveling around. On the upper left corner is Rochefin House, which is the house where Jemima and her husband, Hugh Blackburn, who was a mathematician at Glasgow University, eventually settled. During the school year, they were in Glasgow, obviously, when he was teaching, but then they would retreat to this beautiful home. And to the right of it is her watercolor painting of that area. And then on the bottom left is the house of fellow artist Oliver Ingram Lay, who became a very close friend of Bridges, and she would actually summer with his family in different towns in Connecticut. But this is a It's obviously been restored, but this is one of the houses where they would summer. On the right of that house, you see Bridges' beautiful watercolor painting of her European trip, and this is from Switzerland. And you see Fidelia Bridges' actual watercolor box, but though I'm sure she had many of them, on the lower right. And on the top is a British watercolor set from that time period. I have yet to find out if there's any actual watercolor box for Blackburn. Blackburn showed work at both the Scottish and London Royal Academies. The Royal Academy London accepted Blackburn's paintings of Phaeton in 1848 and in 1849, the plough horse is startled by a railway engine. Women artists, not just in the UK, were limited as to where they could learn and exhibit. In 1860, Laura Herford was accepted into the Royal Academy by accident using LH initials. Perhaps this is why Bridges and Blackburn signed their work FB and JB. In 1893, women were allowed in life classes and could finally become female academicians not until 1936. As a consequence, the Royal Female School of Art was founded in 1842 as a professional art school for women. Though Blackburn didn't study there, she did exhibit her plough horse painting at the Society of Female Artists show in June to July of 1857. So this is 10 years after Ruskin was giving her that harsh critique of the same painting. This was the first exhibition of the Society and was located at 315 Oxford Street in London. There were 358 paintings by 149 female artists, and the paintings were mostly landscapes. The Society was started for women to exhibit and sell their work. In 1899, it became the Society of Women Artists, and today has 150 members. Ruskin debated whether or not women should be artists in the 1850s. In 1858, Ruskin wrote to the artist Sophia Sennett, quote, "You must resolve to be quite a great paintress. The feminine termination does not exist, there never having been such a being as yet as a lady who could paint," unquote. Not only did Bridges exhibit at the Royal Academy in London, but also at the Dudley Gallery in London. Dudley Gallery was founded in 1864 and had its exhibitions in Egyptian Hall, which faced Burlington House, now the Royal Academy. The exhibitions were of watercolor drawings, and Simeon Solomon was one of the founding members. John Everett Millay was also on the selection committee. Edward Burne-Jones, James Whistler, and Lawrence Alma-Tadema were a few artists who exhibited there. In 1883, it became the Dudley Gallery Art Society, and John Ruskin was involved at that point. Bridges exhibited in the annual exhibitions at PAFA from 1862 to 1905. She was in 9 shows, and some of her paintings were already in private collections at that point. Some of the titles: Wheatfield, View on the Lehigh, View at Lake George, Cloverfield, Violets, A Study for Nature, Pastures by the Sea. In 1869, Bridges exhibited in the National Academy of Design in New York City. Blackburn participated in the 1857 to 1858 Modern British Art Show in the United States of America at the National Academy of Design, the Boston Athenaeum, and PAFA. A copy of the PAFA show catalog is housed at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. Under watercolors, there are 2 paintings listed. Mrs. Blackburn's, so not even Jemima Blackburn, but they're saying Mrs. Blackburn. Mrs. Blackburn's Sketch of a Donkey, and Mrs. Blackburn's Scene on the Coast of Ayrshire near the birthplace of the poet Burns. Bridges exhibited in Philadelphia at the Great Central Fair, which was a fundraiser for the Sanitary Commission during the Civil War. It was held at Logan Circle Park. Her study of ferns, owned by Mrs. Hasseltine, a landscape painter, was exhibited. This was also exhibited at one of the annual shows that we just heard about. Fidelia Bridges had 7 paintings on exhibit at the Centennial Art Exhibition. 4 in the American Society of Painters in Watercolors of New York, as she was living in New York then. Kingfisher and catkins, corner of a rye field, flock of snowbirds, daisies and clover. Daisies and clover was actually owned by George Whitney, who was one of Richard's main collectors. Under oil paintings and watercolors, she had 3 watercolors and was listed as the 49th artist. They were titled Summer, Winter, and Kingfisher among the reeds. There was a show of British art, but I have not found evidence that Blackburn was among these artists. Blackburn seemed to have taught herself many things, asked advice from known artists, had lessons with them, and had anatomy lessons. She worked hard and drew her watercolor sketches almost every day. Her work is in the Hunterian, the National Gallery, Scotland, the British Museum, the British Library, the National Portrait Gallery, and the James Clerk Maxwell Foundation, among others. Bridges was the only woman in the early years of the American Watercolor Society and was one of 7 women to be chosen. She was elected to the National Academy of Design as an associate in 1873. In 1876, she exhibited at the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition, and in 1893 at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Her artwork hung in most American homes, and she continued to sell her work to collectors. Her work is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Florence Griswold Museum, the Wadsworth Atheneum, the Amon Carter Museum of American Art, the Woodson Art Museum, among others. Wouldn't it be lovely to now get Blackburn's work in American collections and Bridges' work in British collections? Historical women were artists of natural history. One of the best was Maria Sibylla Merian, who was a German entomologist, naturalist, and scientific illustrator, and the first person to document metamorphosis. She bred and studied insects the way Blackburn did with birds. Here you see on the left my painting representing Maria Sibylla Merian from 2010. She's actually painting in one of her sketchbooks that's it actually still exists. Her daughters Joanna and Dorothea helped her as well. Violante Vanni, her first name means purple flower or violet, was an Italian woman artist from 1732 to 1776. She did the hand coloring for the raptors and was one of 2 engravers for the dedication page in this fabulous book, Saverio Manetti's Storia Naturale degli Uccelli from Florence, 1767, in APS's collection. A number of her engravings are at the PMA. Alexander Wilson was a Scot and father of American ornithology. This Scottish weaver, then poet, came to Philadelphia in 1794 and became fascinated by the bird life of America. With encouragement and instruction from his neighbor, the naturalist William Bartram, he began to draw birds he saw. The engraver Alexander Lawson transferred the drawings to copper plates, and a group of young, mostly female artists colored the prints by hand. In Clark Hunter's book on Wilson, and in a letter written to William Bartram in 1807, Wilson says he would like well-colored specimens of the plates by Miss Nancy Ann, or Anna Bartram, and has sent specimens for her to match. He also says that Mary Leach might help out in particular areas. Some of you may know, but there are some of Wilson's bird specimens that are at the Academy of Natural Sciences at Drexel. First issued in 1832, British John Gould's folio, Birds of Europe, contains 448 hand-colored lithographs that depicted the avifauna found throughout the European continent. Many of the plates were drawn and lithographed by Gould's wife, Elizabeth Coxon. Elizabeth Coxon Gould, in 1804 to 1841, was born in Ramsgate, England. We see her striated acanthisa from Birds of Australia. She is known to have done 650 works in watercolor and lithography. Here we see Thomas Sully's engraving of Alexander Wilson's grave in the APS collection, plus his actual grave at Old Swedes Church in Philadelphia. On the left is a photo of Jemima with her birds. On the right is an image of one of her preserved birds, a juvenile puffin that she gifted to the Hunterian in 1896. 5 or 6 bird skins of magpies and other birds were included in the gift. Jemima had pet ravens named Beelzebub and Asmodeus. Asmodeus once took their priest's Bible and tore it page from page. Jemima would take babies from their nests and draw them and return them, and would import birds from various areas into the area around Rocheven. Jemima put food out for birds at night and would draw birds in their cages and then release them. She rescued injured birds and nursed them. Once she caged a blackbird bird to learn the difference between its song and the thrush song, but the blackbird would not sing. Rocheven seems to have been a menagerie or aviary, really. Robins nested in curtains, and other birds would take butter and crumbs from the table and drink from saucers of water. Jemima even had pet owls and referred to painting the birds' portraits. Jemima's close observation of birds enabled her to make a number of discoveries, the most important perhaps being her drawing and recording evidence of a cuckoo extricating a pipit from its nest. Charles Darwin would include this discovery in his 6th edition of On the Origin of Species. It appears in Jemima's 1872 book, The Pipits. Darwin verifies the cuckoo's behavior, quote, from a trustworthy source, unquote, but sadly never actually names Blackburn. Here we see some of the artist's work. Louis Prang was the printer and publisher and father of the American Christmas card and holiday cards. He hired Bridges to create images of birds for each month, and they were reproduced and very popular. This brought Bridges a good income. And Blackburn's books were popular and sold well. Birds have a long history in Philadelphia. Charles Wilson Peale's museum in Independence Hall had bird displays and a live bald eagle, the symbol of our country. Once the eagle died, he stuffed it and put it on display. It appears in his famous self-portrait artist in his museum at the top left. The Centennial exhibition in 1876 had live birds in the aviary and dead ones in cabinets. Even today, a live eagle is released before the Eagles play football. Queen Victoria was an avid collector of taxidermy birds, and in the Victorian period, it was very popular to collect birds and display them in one's home. A November 1859 newspaper article, A Bird Show, talks about the Crystal Palace's display of birds. Judges awarded prizes, and then families would eventually stuff their prize winners to keep them in their parlor forever. One of the attractions was a talking canary with its speech printed nearby. A linnet who sang the Huntsman chorus was on sale for 50 pounds. Robins flew around and pecked at other robins in cages. A proud thrush was even rumpling his feathers. Parrots with their printed talking repertoire sold for 100 pounds. One parrot even imitated thrushes and performed nursing the baby. John Hancock, a British ornithologist and bird collector, considered the father of British modern taxidermy, created Struggle with Quarry in 1851 and exhibited it at the Great Exhibition. And it shows the struggle between a falcon, a heron, and an eel. Similar drama appears in Blackburn's painting. Blackburn's sparrowhawk once attacked and killed one of her pet pigeons, and some flew into her house and even killed her birds in their cages. Here on the right is a taxidermy tableau by Martha Maxwell, who was born in Tioga County, Pennsylvania in 1831. She was the first woman field naturalist to obtain and observe her own specimens. In Colorado, she collected animals, and by 1868 had prepared about 100 specimens. So in 1874, she could open her Rocky Mountain Museum in Boulder for education and entertainment. Birds were a big part of her displays, and there were live animals too. Her technique was original. She created plaster molds, and then she would put the skins over top of them. Later, the plaster molds became iron frames. In 1876, she was invited to participate in the Centennial exhibition here in Philadelphia. The display, called Women's Work, had running water, live prairie dogs, and animals that she had hunted and mounted. The display was very popular and they actually ran out of photo souvenirs of it. She had no money and slept in a cave in her own diorama. A mounted dusky grouse chick and woodpecker eggs, among others, exist at the Smithsonian, and mounted rosy finches are in the Bergen Museum, Norway, the Bell Museum of the University of Minnesota, and the Royal Ontario Museum. The Field Museum of Natural History has some of her specimens as well, and the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard has the most. Field glasses saw many 19th century developments. Ignacio Porro created the prism erecting system in 1854. Before this moment, the birds appeared upside down in the viewer. Carl Zeiss and Ernst Abbe took field glasses further in 1893. With the novelty of portable cameras in 1888, birding became a popular pastime and conservation a bigger concern. A typical cost of field glasses was 18 pounds in 1912. We also see the periodical Ornithologist and Eulogist becoming popular, and women writing books and focusing on educating children to be conservationists as well. Which leads us to bird conservation. One of my goals for this project is to draw parallels between the diminishing numbers of birds due to hunting and fashion in Bridges and Blackburn's time with dwindling bird populations today due to global warming and other threats. The Royal Society for the Protection of Birds was founded in 1889, and in America, the National Audubon Society was founded in 1905. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act was signed into law in 1918 in the United States, nearly simultaneously with the passage of the 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote. In fact, women were driving these changes. The avian motif became so popular, supporters wore bluebird pins for solidarity during state suffrage votes in the US and in Canada. They used a thrush on their pins, as seen here. Audubonnets were being produced in honor of John James Audubon to encourage women to not buy hats and fashion with dead birds or feathers on them. Jemima wrote and hoped that her books on birds would, quote, lead them, people, to consider the fowls of the air as capable of affording delight in other ways besides filling a game bag or adorning a hat, unquote. Let's remember she published her Birds Drawn from Nature in 1862 and Birds from Moidart and Elsewhere in 1895. And Bridges was really devoting the majority of her creative output to birds and their natural habitats and bringing them to the foreground of the picture plane. Bridges was a sustaining member of the American Forestry Association, which was founded in 1875. They maintained forests with one of the main goals of boosting the habitat for endangered birds. Mark Twain, who was actually a printer in Philadelphia in the 1850s, was an early member of the Audubon Society and was very vocal on his support for the national park system. He was interested in natural history and conservation. He was also concerned about animal rights and was a supporter of women's suffrage, and he wrote his speech, Votes for Women, in 1901. Bridges was his children's governess for a year in 1883, and he collected her work. There is the Mark Twain National Forest in the Missouri Ozark with 650 species of wildlife, which he helped to name in 1935, and it includes 1.5 million acres. He wrote, quote, to one in sympathy with nature, each season in its turn seems the loveliest, unquote. Beatrix Potter, at age 10, was given Blackburn's Birds Drawn from Nature, and it greatly influenced her. The two women met in 1894 when Blackburn was visiting Putney Park near London, the home of a cousin of Potter's. Potter found her an extraordinarily interesting woman. Quote, "I have not been so much struck by anyone for a long time," unquote. As a young person, Potter copied Blackburn's drawing of mice on a clock in her book, The Pippets. And it is believed that Potter's character, Jemima Puddleduck, is named for Jemima Blackburn. That particular book has sold over 250 million copies. Potter was an illustrator, natural scientist, and a conservationist. She would buy up farms in the Lake District to preserve the landscape and left most of her land, over 4,000 acres, to the National Trust, now Lake District National Park. She would also summer on River Tay in Perthshire, Scotland. The rare book room at the Free Library of Philadelphia has an enormous collection of her work, of Potter's work, from H. Bacon, Collimore, and Marion Perry, who was a widow of a Calvary Episcopal minister here in Philadelphia. John Burroughs, 1837 to 1921, was an American naturalist, conservationist, and writer. In 1871, he wrote his collection of essays in Wake Robin. Wake robin is another name for trillium, a woodland perennial flower, and does not refer to a bird. The book sold over 1 million copies, and many of his essays on birds and flowers appeared in popular magazines. He wrote Birds and Poets, Birds and Bees and Other Studies in Nature, and a biography on Audubon, as well as a book called Bird and Bough. He said, quote, "The song of the hermit thrush brought him serene exaltation of sentiment of which music, literature, and religion are but the faint types of symbols." Bridges collaborated with him in her book illustrations, and she owned a copy of his Wake Robin and painted in the margins. Celia Thaxter, known for her beautiful gardens and her poetry, wrote the Ideals and Pastorals, a home gallery of poetry and art in 1886, and two of the illustrators were Fidelia Bridges and Child Hassam. Bridges owned a copy of Thaxter's poems from 1896 and painted in the margins. I now own these books, and I will be painting in the margins as well for this project. In the UK, there are 6 species of thrush, and 2 are red listed and 2 are amber listed, which are endangered levels due to global warming. The song thrush has seen a large decline since the 70s and 80s due to a lack of food and nesting sites from intensive farming. The RSPB says they are trying to improve these numbers by increasing hedgerows and by using new farming methods. According to Audubon's Birds and Climate Change Report, the wood thrush is predicted to lose up to 82% of its summer range by 2080. Okay. I'm going to read you now 2 poems, or excerpts from 2 poems. The first one is John Burroughs' poem, The Hermit Thrush, from 1870. In the primal forest's hush, listen, the hermit thrush. Silver chords of purest sound, pealing through the depths profound, tranquil rapture, unafraid in the fragrant morning shade. Pausing in the twilight dim, hear him lift his evening hymn. Clear it rings from mountain crest, pulsing out from speckled breast. Day is done, the moon doth soar. Still the hermit, oh and oh, in the deepening twilight long, holds and swells his cadenced song. And then a little excerpt from a Robbie Burns poem. From 1788. Sonnet on Hearing a Thrush Song. Sing on, that's the title, sorry. Sing on, sweet thrush, Upon the leafless bough, sing on, sweet bird, I listen to thy strain. See aged winter mid his surly reign, at thy blithe carol clears his furrowed brow. Well, thank you so much for your attention and for your interest.
Thank you so much, Holly, for that fantastic talk. I think we have a couple minutes for a few questions, and I'll bring the mic to you.
Thanks. William Thrust Richards. I knew him as a maritime painter, but I mean, I don't know too much about him. If you could give me a little bit more of a background in association with the artist that he, you know.
Well, William Thrust Richards was an American pre-Raphaelite landscape painter. So of course, you know, that would include the maritime scenes, but, you know, his early work and when he was at PAFA was really, you know, around like the woodland scenes. So the image that I included is very typical of his work then. And, you know, he's kind of credited with a lot of the pre-Raphaelite paintings, if you've seen them in museums, have like a sort of like a Gothic arch at the top, and he was one of the first ones to do that.
All right, this might be a bit of an unfair question, but were the two comparable in talent,
Were the two comparable?
the two painters, in your opinion?
In my opinion, yes, but they're quite different. I mean, I think the similarity is, you know, this world that they were working in, and the fact that they devoted so much of their time and their artistic output to birds, and I think that's what I'm seeking to bring to attention. I think, as I said in the introduction, you know, they both started out in this very pre-Raphaelite style, but then they developed their own mature individual styles, which I think I can very honestly and clearly say is very distinctive from other artists in that time period and even today. I mean, there's not another artist that was doing what Fidelia Bridges was doing with pushing the, you know, the landscape, like a branch of weeds and a bird to the foreground, so that we really focus in on that. It's a very unique thing to do.
And how did you acquire her paint box?
Oh, I don't have the paint box, but I have. Actually, David and I bought the paint box that I'm showing to represent paint boxes in the UK from that time period. But Fidelia Bridges' paint box is in a private collection,
Oh, okay.
so it may be someone in her, you know, a descendant, possibly.
Thank you.
In regard to the book by Wilson on American Ornithology, were there more than one volumes of that particular book?
Wilson, I think there are multiple volumes, yes.
Yes, because I have 4 of them.
Oh, you
that's
do? Well, then you're very lucky. Have you gone to see his grave?
No, I have not.
Yeah, it's really, and it's interesting because obviously he was such an important figure, and even in that time period that, you know, that Thomas Sully would do an engraving of, you know, a mourner at his graveside. I think that's really very poignant.
Did you say his grave was at Old Swedes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Old Swedes.
Yeah, and Ord's tomb is there too, not too far away. George Ord.
Well, I think we're unfortunately out of time, but let's thank Holly again for this great talk.
Thank you.